Number 1. Louise Woodward. Louise Woodward was a 19-year-old au pair from Elton, England. In 1997, she became the center of one of the most widely watched trials in Massachusetts. Reports identify her as the babysitter charged in the death of 8-month-old Matthew Eppen. On February 4, 1997, Matthew was rushed to Children's Hospital in Boston after his parents found him unresponsive. Medical staff documented a skull fracture, bleeding around the brain, and retinal hemorrhaging. Prosecutors argued these injuries were consistent with violent shaking. Doctors later testified that the child's injuries could not have been accidental. Woodward had been living with the Eppen family in Newton, Massachusetts, for only a few months. Court testimony stated that on the day of the incident, she was alone with Matthew for several hours. When paramedics arrived, Matthew was already in critical condition. He died 5 days later, on February 9th. Police questioned Woodward that evening. Investigators recorded her admitting she had been a little rough with the baby, but denied any intent to harm. According to prosecutors, she shook the infant in frustration and caused fatal head trauma. Defense attorneys challenged this, saying the medical evidence was not clear-cut and that older injuries suggested a longer history of medical issues. The trial began in October 1997 at Middlesex Superior Court. Jurors heard weeks of testimony from pediatric specialists, forensic pathologists, and first responders. Prosecutors showed charts and scans of Matthew's injuries. They argued the timeline placed Woodward directly as the only possible cause. On October 30th, the jury returned a verdict of second-degree murder. That conviction carried a mandatory life sentence in Massachusetts. But days later, Judge Hiller Zobel reduced the conviction to involuntary manslaughter, citing concerns over conflicting medical testimony. He sentenced Woodward to time served 279 days in custody and ordered her immediate release. The decision sparked international debate. In the courtroom, members of the Eppen family sat in silence as the ruling was read. Outside, television cameras captured reactions from both supporters and critics. For the prosecution, it was a case they believed proved a deliberate act. For the defense, it highlighted the uncertainties of shaken baby syndrome science. Louise Woodward returned to the United Kingdom shortly after her release. The case remains one of the most scrutinized examples of a babysitter trial in modern U.S. history, a collision of medical evidence, jury perception, and judicial discretion. Number 2. Christine Falling. Christine Falling was a 19-year-old babysitter from Perry, Florida. In the early 1980s, she became known as one of the youngest women in America convicted of serial child murders. Court records show that between 1980 and 1982, several children in Falling's care died under suspicious circumstances. Local doctors initially attributed the deaths to natural causes such as sudden infant death syndrome, but as the pattern grew, investigators began to look closer. In February 1980, 2-year-old Cassidy Johnson died while Falling was babysitting in Blountstown, Florida. A few months later, 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis collapsed at his home while she was watching him. The next day, Jeffrey's cousin, Joseph Spring, also under Falling's care, was found dead. Over the following year, other children she babysat suffered sudden respiratory failure and died. Autopsy reports documented internal injuries and signs consistent with asphyxiation. According to prosecutors, Falling admitted during questioning that she had smothered children with pillows or blankets when she felt overwhelmed. In taped statements, she described hearing voices that pushed her to kill. In September 1982, a grand jury indicted her on multiple counts of murder. At trial, prosecutors presented testimony from medical experts, law enforcement officers, and families of the victims. The case highlighted the difficulties of detecting foul play in infant deaths at the time. Falling's defense cited mental health issues and her limited intellectual abilities. In December 1982, she entered a guilty plea to 3 counts of murder in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the death penalty. A Florida judge sentenced her to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years before parole eligibility. Christine Falling remains incarcerated today. The case is often cited in forensic studies as an example of evolving medical standards in identifying child abuse and suffocation. Families in northern Florida still remember her as the babysitter whose visits ended in tragedy. Number 3. Jocelyn Ortega. Jocelyn Ortega was a 50-year-old nanny from the Dominican Republic, living in Manhattan, New York. In October of 2012, she became the focus of one of the most disturbing childcare-related homicide cases in U.S. history. On October 25, 2012, Marina Krim returned to her Upper West Side apartment with her 3-year-old daughter. Inside the bathroom, she discovered the bodies of her other 2 children, 6-year-old Lucia, Lulu, and 2-year-old Leo. Both had been stabbed multiple times. Lying nearby was their nanny, Jocelyn Ortega, who had also stabbed herself in the neck in what prosecutors later described as a failed suicide attempt. Investigators documented a violent crime scene. The children's injuries showed multiple defensive wounds, suggesting they struggled. Police officers who responded recalled Marina Krim's screams, echoing down the hallway. The case quickly drew national attention, with reporters outside the family's West 79th Street building. Prosecutors argued Ortega deliberately killed the children as an act of resentment toward the Krim family. Testimony revealed that Ortega had financial difficulties, was unhappy with her work hours, and had clashed with Marina in the weeks before the killings. In statements at trial, prosecutors said Ortega planned the attack while she was alone in the apartment with the children. The trial began in March 2018 at Manhattan Supreme Court. Jurors heard testimony from medical examiners, detectives, and members of the Krim family. Prosecutors presented photographs of the scene, autopsy results, and Ortega's statements. The defense argued Ortega suffered from severe mental illness and should not be held criminally responsible. After weeks of testimony, the jury rejected the insanity defense. On April 18, 2018, they found Ortega guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, the courtroom was silent as Marina and Kevin Krim gave emotional victim impact statements. The case left a lasting mark on New York City, sparking widespread discussion about trust, childcare, and the hidden stresses of domestic workers. Jocelyn Ortega remains incarcerated in New York State. The Krim family later established the Lulu and Leo Fund in memory of their children, aimed at supporting creative programs for kids. Number 4. Elżbieta Płakowska. Elżbieta Płakowska was a 40-year-old nanny from Naperville, Illinois. In October of 2012, she was charged with one of the most shocking double homicides in suburban Chicago history. On the night of October 30th, 2012, Naperville police were called to a townhouse on Quinn Hill Court. Inside, officers found the bodies of 5-year-old Olivia Dworkowski and 5-year-old Justin Płakowska, Elżbieta's own son. Both children had been stabbed multiple times. Court records state that Olivia was stabbed more than 50 times, while Justin suffered nearly 100 stab wounds. Investigators said Płakowska had been babysitting Olivia that evening while her mother worked. According to prosecutors, she later admitted that she killed both children after becoming overwhelmed by feelings of resentment and anger. In taped statements, she told detectives that she wanted the children to go to heaven and not suffer as she claimed she had. During the trial, prosecutors presented graphic crime scene photographs, testimony from forensic pathologists, and accounts from first responders. They argued that Płakowska's actions were deliberate and calculated, pointing to the sheer number of wounds and her attempt to clean the scene afterward. Detectives testified that she left the townhouse and went to a nearby church, where she confessed to a priest. The defense argued that Płakowska suffered from severe mental illness, including depression and psychosis. They contended she believed she was protecting the children from a harsh world. Mental health experts called by the defense described her as delusional. In September of 2015, a DuPage County judge found Płakowska guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Because the case was tried before a judge rather than a jury, the ruling came directly from the bench after weeks of testimony. She was sentenced to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with emotional testimony from Olivia's family, who described the devastating loss. Prosecutors called the killings acts of pure evil. The case stands as one of the darkest in Illinois history, involving a caretaker and child. Elżbieta Płakowska remains incarcerated in an Illinois state prison. Number 5. Louise Porton. Louise Porton was a 23-year-old mother and part-time caregiver from Warwickshire, England. In 2019, she was convicted in one of the United Kingdom's most disturbing childcare-related murder cases. On January 15, 2019, Porton called emergency services to report that her 3-year-old daughter, Lexi Draper, was unresponsive. Paramedics rushed the child to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Less than 3 weeks later, on February 1st, her second daughter, 17-month-old Scarlett Vaughn, also died under similar circumstances while in her care. Medical staff raised immediate concerns. Both children had unexplained symptoms, and autopsies revealed signs of deliberate airway obstruction. Prosecutors later argued that Porton had intentionally killed her daughters because they interfered with her lifestyle. Court records show that in the days surrounding the deaths, Porton was active on dating apps and continued to send explicit messages to men. Detectives from Warwickshire Police launched a full investigation. They examined Porton's phone records, online activity, and witness testimony. According to prosecutors, the evidence showed that Porton viewed her daughters as a burden and repeatedly sought ways to rid herself of them. Investigators also discovered that she had searched online for methods of suffocation. The trial began in June 2019 at Birmingham Crown Court. Prosecutors presented detailed medical testimony, electronic evidence from Porton's devices, and statements from childcare professionals who had observed her behavior. They described her as emotionless and detached following both deaths. Porton denied harming her children and told the court she had no idea why they died. Her defense argued that both deaths could have been natural or coincidental. However, after 6 weeks of testimony, the jury found her guilty of 2 counts of murder. On August 1, 2019, Justice Amanda Yip sentenced Porton to life imprisonment with a minimum of 32 years before eligibility for parole. In her remarks, the judge called Porton's crimes evil beyond comprehension and highlighted her complete lack of remorse. The case shocked the United Kingdom, sparking national debate about child protection and the hidden dangers within households. Louise Porton remains incarcerated, serving one of the longest sentences ever imposed on a woman in modern British legal history. Number 6. Janine Jones. Janine Jones was a licensed vocational nurse in Texas, often trusted in roles similar to a babysitter for hospital infants. In the 1980s, she became infamous as one of the most prolific child killers in American medical history. Between 1981 and 1982, a series of otherwise healthy infants and toddlers at Bexar County Medical Center in San Antonio suddenly collapsed or died while under Jones's care. Medical staff began noticing a disturbing pattern. Babies who were stable would suddenly stop breathing or suffer seizures when Jones was on duty. An investigation revealed that Jones had been injecting children with drugs such as heparin and succinylcholine, substances that could induce bleeding, paralysis, or respiratory arrest. According to prosecutors, she deliberately created medical emergencies in order to position herself as a hero who could save the children, a psychological pattern known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The case that brought her to trial involved 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan. On September 17, 1982, Chelsea died after a routine clinic visit in Kerrville, Texas. Autopsy results showed traces of succinylcholine. Detectives documented Jones as the nurse administering care that day. Her trial began in early 1984 at Kerr County Courthouse. Prosecutors presented expert testimony, toxicology reports, and accounts from fellow medical staff. Witnesses described how vials of drugs repeatedly went missing from supply rooms when Jones was present. The jury heard chilling testimony from doctors who suspected her long before Chelsea's death. On February 15, 1984, the jury found Jones guilty of murder and injury to a child. She was sentenced to 99 years in prison for murder and 60 years for the additional charge, to be served concurrently. In 2018, under mandatory release laws of the time, Jones was set for early parole. Public outrage followed. Prosecutors in San Antonio reopened dozens of infant death investigations linked to her. She was indicted on 5 new murder charges. In January 2020, she pled guilty to the murder of 11-month-old Joshua Sawyer, receiving a life sentence. Janine Jones remains incarcerated in Texas. Authorities believe she may be responsible for as many as 60 infant deaths, though the true number will likely never be fully known. Number 7. Dina Schlosser. Dina Schlosser was a 37-year-old mother from Plano, Texas. In November 2004, she became the center of a case that shocked both law enforcement and the medical community, raising questions about mental illness, religious influence, and child safety. On the morning of November 22, 2004, a 911 operator in Collin County received a disturbing call. It was from Dina's husband, John Schlosser. He told dispatchers that his wife had just harmed their baby. Police and paramedics rushed to the family's apartment. Inside, they found 11-month-old Margaret Schlosser fatally injured. Reports show the infant had been attacked with a kitchen knife while lying in her crib. Detectives described a chaotic scene. Dina was discovered in the living room, covered in blood, singing church hymns. According to first responders, she was calm and detached, speaking about hearing God's command. Investigators later said she had been suffering from postpartum psychosis, a severe mental illness that had gone untreated in the months following her daughter's birth. The case drew additional attention because of Dina's ties to a controversial pastor in the Dallas area. Prosecutors argued that her mental state had been worsened by exposure to extreme religious teachings that convinced her she had to sacrifice her child. Witnesses testified that she previously sought psychiatric treatment but had stopped taking medication in the weeks before the killing. Her trial began in Collin County in February 2006. Prosecutors presented crime scene photographs, forensic testimony, and taped interviews where Dina described the voices she claimed to hear. The defense focused on her history of mental illness, citing medical records and expert psychiatrists who testified she was incapable of understanding her actions. On April 7, 2006, a jury found Schlosser not guilty by reason of insanity. She was committed to a state mental hospital for treatment rather than sent to prison. Court documents show she was released in 2008 under strict supervision, but was later recommitted after violating conditions of her release. Dina Schlosser remains under psychiatric care within the Texas mental health system. The case is often cited in legal and medical studies as one of the most tragic examples of postpartum psychosis leading to infanticide in the United States. Number 8. Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony was a 22-year-old mother from Orlando, Florida, when she became the focus of one of the most highly publicized trials in U.S. history. Though not a hired babysitter, her case became intertwined with that role after she falsely claimed that a nanny was responsible for her daughter's disappearance. On July 15, 2008, Casey's mother, Cindy Anthony, dialed 911 to report that her granddaughter, 2-year-old Kaylee Anthony, had been missing for more than a month. Cindy told the dispatcher, "It smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." Police quickly focused their investigation on Casey, who had given conflicting stories about Kaylee's whereabouts. According to investigators, Casey initially claimed that a babysitter named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, whom she called Zanny the Nanny, had kidnapped Kaylee. Detectives later determined that no such babysitter existed. Forensic testing showed traces of chloroform in Casey's car trunk, along with hair that analysts said was microscopically similar to Kaylee's. In December 2008, Kaylee's skeletal remains were found in a wooded area less than half a mile from the Anthony family home. The discovery included a small blanket and duct tape attached to the skull, items prosecutors argued were clear signs of homicide. Casey Anthony was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and related counts. Her trial began in May 2011 at the Orange County Courthouse. Prosecutors presented forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Casey's documented lies about Kaylee's disappearance. The defense countered that Kaylee had drowned accidentally in the family pool and that Casey's father, George Anthony, helped cover it up, a claim he denied. On July 5, 2011, the jury acquitted Casey of murder and child abuse, but convicted her of 4 misdemeanor counts of lying to law enforcement. She was sentenced to time served and released shortly afterward. The verdict shocked the public, sparking intense debate across the country. Many saw it as a failure of the prosecution to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt, despite strong circumstantial evidence. The phrase, "Zanny the Nanny," became infamous as part of Casey's false narrative, forever tying the case to a supposed babysitter who never existed. Today, Casey Anthony lives in Florida. She has given limited interviews and continues to be viewed as one of the most controversial figures in modern American criminal history. Number 9. Michelle Kehoe. Michelle Kehoe was a 35-year-old mother from Iowa who presented herself as a caregiver but became the subject of one of the most chilling child homicide trials in the Midwest. On November 10, 2008, officers in Buchanan County, Iowa, responded to a 911 call reporting an abandoned van near the town of Littleton. Inside the vehicle, they found Michelle Kehoe injured, with cuts to her neck and wrists. A search of the surrounding area led investigators to a nearby ditch, where they discovered the bodies of her two sons. 8-year-old Seth was dead, while his younger brother, Noah, survived with severe injuries. Detectives quickly pieced together the scene. According to prosecutors, Michelle had driven the boys to the remote area, bound and gagged them with duct tape, and attacked them with a knife before turning the blade on herself in an attempted suicide. Seth died from multiple stab wounds, while Noah managed to free himself enough to be discovered alive. At trial, prosecutors presented forensic evidence, including the knife used in the attacks, duct tape recovered from the van, and Michelle's written notes describing her intentions. Witness testimony revealed that she had long struggled with depression and suicidal thoughts. Prosecutors argued she acted out of desperation, believing she could not care for her children. The defense argued that Michelle's mental illness should mitigate her responsibility. Psychiatrists testified about her history of psychological treatment and antidepressant use. However, the surviving son, Noah, gave a recorded statement that was played in court, describing how his mother attacked both him and his brother. His words had a profound impact on jurors. In December 2009, a Buchanan County jury found Michelle Kehoe guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Seth and attempted murder for the attack on Noah. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 25 years. The courtroom was silent as Noah's testimony was replayed during sentencing. Prosecutors called it one of the most heartbreaking cases in Iowa's history. Today, Michelle Kehoe remains incarcerated in Iowa, serving a life sentence. Number 10. Olivia Labinjo Halcrow. Olivia Labinjo Halcrow was a 26-year-old woman from Birmingham, England. Though not a traditional babysitter, her case is often grouped with domestic caregiving tragedies because the victim was her own child, left in her care. On February 23, 2019, West Midlands police were called to a home in Birmingham after reports of a young boy in medical distress. Inside, officers found the body of 4-year-old Daniel. Paramedics declared him dead at the scene. Detectives described injuries that were both extensive and shocking. According to prosecutors, Daniel had been stabbed more than 30 times with a kitchen knife. Forensic pathologists later testified that several of the wounds were fatal on their own. At trial, prosecutors argued that Olivia attacked her son during a sudden episode of rage while caring for him alone. Witnesses testified about her struggles with alcohol and a history of unstable relationships. Investigators recovered the knife used in the killing, along with blood-stained clothing hidden in the house. The defense admitted Olivia caused the fatal injuries but argued diminished responsibility due to mental health issues. Psychiatrists testified about her depression and history of emotional instability. However, prosecutors countered that the ferocity of the attack and her attempt to conceal evidence showed intent. In August 2019, a Birmingham Crown Court jury convicted her of manslaughter. She was sentenced to 18 years in prison. During sentencing, the judge described the killing as an appalling breach of trust, emphasizing that Daniel had been completely dependent on her for care and protection. The case left a deep impact across the United Kingdom, sparking debates about mental health support for parents and the systems in place to protect vulnerable children. Olivia Labinjo Halcrow remains incarcerated, serving her sentence. Which of these cases do you think was the most disturbing? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.